Welcome to the OT podcast, which takes a deep dive into the topics affecting optometrists today. Each time we'll find a real expert in their field and attempt to pull everything we can out of their brain so it may reside in yours. I'm Kerry Smith-James, I'm the clinical multimedia editor for Optometry Today. I'm also an independent prescriber in practice in Lancashire. With me today is
Ian Beasley, and I'm Head of Education for the AOP and Clinical Editor of Optometry Today. I'm also a visiting lecturer and researcher at Aston University. So, Kerry, it's hard to believe we're here for our second episode of the OT podcast already.
That's right.
For those of you that missed the first episode with Professor Nicola Logan, then that is available to listen to on our website, Optometry Today website, but also via the usual podcast provider apps. In that first episode, we were looking at myopia management and the evidence behind myopia. We've got a new topic to explore this time around, which is really looking at Optometrist 2.0. So what's the future of optometry looking like for those that are qualifying in today's era? And if I cast my mind back, Kerry, to when I first qualified, which was literally in the last century, just thinking about my consulting room as a pre-reg, at my disposal I had a Jerem screen.
Nice.
I didn't have a Volt lens. I certainly didn't have a fundus camera, nor did we have the internet. In our premium consulting room, we had a Friedman visual screener.
Ooh.
Where you had to draw on where somebody had missed a point on the visual field test. All sounds quite archaic. Now, you're not as old as me, of course, Kerry, but what was it like for you when you started out?
I started out, it was all ophthalmoscopy really, and I switched out of ophthalmoscopy to Volk fairly early on, just because I was an amblyop and I was getting ridiculous backache and neck ache trying to lean sideways to examine people's eyes all day. But we didn't have. I don't think there were as many options for upgrading yourself in those days. And actually thinking about it, CET as it was called then, which is now called CPD, it wasn't compulsory. So you'd go along to a lecture because you were interested in something, but you didn't really think about your scope of practice and how it aligned to it and upgrading your qualification. You were kind of qualified or you weren't really. And now there's a plethora of qualifications you can do after becoming an optometrist in the first place. And we've both had a crack at improving ourselves over the years.
If we think about that definition of the leap from Optometrist 1.0 to 2.0, I'd say our guest today certainly fills the category of the latter. So I'm delighted to welcome Ian Cameron. And just before we sort of settle down and have a chat, Ian, I just thought I'd do a formal introduction, if that's okay. So Ian is Managing Director of Cameron Optometry, a large contact lens and therapeutics specialist practice in Edinburgh. Ian is an enthusiastic independent prescriber and lectures widely on all aspects of eye care, from business to retinal pathology. So welcome, Ian.
Oh, thanks very much. And in fact, it's nice because when you two are discussing feeling old, you're making me feel young, because I actually went to uni in 2000 and qualified in 2004, so that's all this century. So that's great. I feel like the baby of the group, which is quite nice.
Well, you did follow in my footsteps at UMIST together. So
that's right, UMIST, as was, yeah, not anymore. We're so old, our university doesn't even exist anymore. That's how old we are, Kerry.
So thinking about where you are now, Ian, in your practice, take us right back to the beginning. So how did you start out and what's that journey been like?
My father is an optometrist. My grandfather was a dispensing optician before him. I can remember having a conversation with my dad. I don't know how old I'd be, maybe 12 or something like that. And I said to my dad, you enjoy what you do, don't you, Dad? And he was like, yeah, I do. Yeah, I really enjoy it. And I said, oh, that's good. And I said, well, you earn a decent amount of money, don't you? And he said, yeah, we have a pretty good lifestyle. And I said, I think I'll just do that then. And then that was it. And I never really entertained any other career path, even probably remotely after that. So, and I would be 12 or something like that. So that just set me on the path to choosing what subjects I would study at school. I studied the sciences thinking, well, I'm going to go and do optometry, so I better do the sciences. And I only applied for optometry, didn't think about doing anything else. And just kind of dived into that with both feet and went to UMIST, as was, in 2000. Qualified there and did my pre-reg 2003-2004 in Manchester Royal Eye Hospital, and continued after my pre-reg there to work in the eye hospital, but did some work back at UMIST as well in contact lens research. So there's a research unit in UMIST called Eurolens doing contact lens research. What else was I doing at that stage? That's when I was doing I'd also taught in the clinics, the undergraduate clinics, so I quite enjoyed that teaching element. And so I quite liked the variety. So I did a couple of days at the eye hospital, a couple of days in research, a bit of undergraduate refraction. So I had this sort of variegated career, which was great fun back in those days. I was learning loads and having a great time. And then had always planned to come back to the family business, and I married a lovely girl down in Manchester, but unfortunately she passed away very soon after we were married down in Manchester. So that sort of change in life kind of forced the issue, I think, and I thought, well, I was going to go back to Edinburgh and maybe this is the time to go back. I had sort of planned to maybe stay on and do a PhD and do some more research, because I was quite enjoying the contact lens research. But I'd always planned to move back to independent practice, and that sort of forced the issue. So back I came, that was the end of 2005. I came back to Edinburgh and joined in the family business here. Cameron Optometry is in Edinburgh, and have been working there ever since. That's me, really.
And at that time, were you still working alongside Dad in the practice?
Yeah, so my dad was there for a while. My mum also worked in the practice, and my sister rented office space, had a job nothing to do with optometry, but just happened we had a spare room, and so she happened to rent that as her office space. So all four of the family were working in the same building, so it was pretty hardcore, but we always got on well. It was never much of an issue. And in fact, at that time when I'd moved back, I was renovating. I bought a flat and was renovating it, and that took like 9 months. So I was living back with my mum and dad, and we were all working together in the same room. So it was this sort of super intense family period. But maybe that was a good thing given what I was going through in my personal life at that time. So so that worked well. And then latterly, my dad had always planned to sort of step back gently. My mum unfortunately got ill. She'd had cancer a long time ago when I was young. Cancer came back, and so my dad said, look, I really need to just get out of the practice and be with your mum. And so he took a step back from the practice. That'd be 2011. I can't quite get my dates, something like that. So I'd been in the practice a few years by that stage. But we'd planned this sort of careful transition where I would start to take on things about the business and learn how to run the business, because by that stage it was quite a big enterprise. And obviously at optometry school you get virtually no training in business whatsoever, so expected to run this big business with no qualification in that at all. But in fact my dad just basically had to leave and left the business, and it was a sink or swim for a while, and I very nearly sank for quite a while. So it was hard graft those first few years. I was working really, really hard, a lot of hours, trying to do the clinical stuff, trying to develop my own career, trying to learn how to run a business, look after staff, develop the business, start new services. It was just full on all the time. So up until then, I guess I had sort of lived the optometry high life, right? From sort of 2005 to 2010, I was living the dream. So because I didn't really have any sort of responsibility in terms of making the business make any money or like looking after staff. But I got to work in this fantastic practice with a huge range of patients, opened me up to a load of stuff that I wouldn't have seen elsewhere. Did some qualifications, so did my IP as soon as that was available in 2009-10 is when I did my IP. I did my diploma in contact lens practice as well. Did as much lecturing as anybody would have me, so if some folk wanted me to talk about stuff, so I was flying around all over the place doing lectures wherever I could, involved in research here and there, going to conferences everywhere. So it was absolutely brilliant. It was like an optometry dream. And then back to earth with a crash when the responsibility of actually looking after a staff team and developing a business landed on my shoulders. But it was a great phase for career development. So I came on an awful long way from 2005 to 2012. I just absolutely motored through stuff, learned so much, took on so much, did so many things, clinics and hospitals, all sorts of things. So really kind of condensed period of learning for me, and probably never learned so much in such a short space of time again, actually, but it was a great time.
Maybe you can give us some insight into how it is now. I mean, you had those halcyon days, and now you've actually, all the responsibility is on your shoulders, and you've got to work out the balance between working on the business and working in the business, and managing stuff. And how are you coping with that now?
It's always a learning point, and you're always adjusting the balance. I think someone described it like burners on a gas fire, where you can kind of turn one, or on a gas cooker, and you can turn one up, but you can't have like all 4 or 5 burning at maximum all the time, or you're just too much. And so you have to kind of keep them all in burning optimally. And I suppose it's a bit like that. So sometimes your personal life's busy, and maybe you have to just kind of cool it a bit in terms of what you're taking on in the business. Sometimes the business is really busy, so I have to just kind of, my other interests have to calm down a bit. Sometimes I need to develop myself clinically, and so I need to the business kind of takes a bit of a rest. You can't push all these things forward with maximum effectiveness all at the same time. So if I want to develop my personal optometry abilities, kind of what's happening in the business takes a bit of a back seat. I can't also be starting new services very effectively or transforming the way I do things in the business if I'm doing a qualification in glaucoma or whatever. And then vice versa. If I'm really pushing things forward in the business, then inevitably my sort of clinical interests take a bit more of a back seat for a couple of years while I push that thing forward. So it's constantly just doing a bit of this one, pushing that a bit forward, moving that a bit forward, moving that a bit forward, rather than pushing all things all the time. I think that's a recipe for burnout, which I definitely want to avoid. So I'm pretty careful about managing my time, and I'm pretty good at saying no to stuff. So people ask me to do things and I just say no, and I don't feel bad about that. I'm just say I don't have time for that, even if it's interesting. There might have been a time when I used to do that. Like now, I guess I'm doing less like lecturing. I'm away from the business less now, and away from family less than I was back in the early days. Just different responsibilities, and I guess like all things, there's a time for this and a time for that. So there was a time for me really pushing my career forward, and then there was a time for me really pushing the business forward, and you move through these different phases, and I don't. I look back on those kind of halcyon days as you describe them, Kerry, and I do enjoy them, but I don't think I want to do that again. Like, I don't think, I wish I just had no responsibilities and I could just do my clinical stuff again. Like, I feel like I've done that, and that was good, and it was the right thing at the right time, but now I love what I'm doing now. I love looking after the staff team. I love bringing on new members of staff, and, we're 6 IP optometrists, or 5 IP optometrists, plus me. The 5th is in training at the moment, but so we're all IP optoms. There's 6 of us in the team. It's a great team to be a part of, and we learn so much from each other. And I love developing those guys and putting them in an environment where they can develop. So, the development that can take place in this practice is it's kind of by virtue of the practice. It's the type of patients that we see, the contract that we have with the hospital, the reputation that we have, and the long-standing sort of reputation that my dad built over many years makes the practice environment quite unique, and that is a great learning opportunity. So actually the most I learn is by just being in practice every day and seeing the range of stuff that we have here, which is very unusual. And that then is great for new optometrists coming in. Like when I'm taking on new optometrists, I'm always saying to them, look, if you want like an easy life, this isn't the practice to come to. But if you want to learn stuff that you've never seen anywhere else and get opportunities that you will not have other places and learn skills that you will just not have the opportunity to learn anywhere else, then this is the place for you. If you want to be at the edge of your comfort zone all the time because you're seeing stuff that you just don't really know what you're doing with, then come aboard and you're going to absolutely love it. And it's great. So like every day in practice is a stretch. And that's good, and that's I suppose what keeps it interesting for me. And I it's always like that, and that's the environment that we're in. And so bringing other people into that environment is really fun, because I see people now and I think you'd be a great optometrist if you were just put in the right environment. And there's so many good optometrists out there. They just need to be exposed to the right stimulus to provoke the growth that they need. And I find that very engaging and fulfilling now to find other people and think I could help you be an amazing optometrist just by putting you in this environment and exposing you to the stuff that I was exposed to at a young age. And and so that really stimulates me now. So actually I quite enjoy that aspect of practice more so than maybe my own personal growth as it was, but I still find time for that when I can.
What is it that you look for in those recruits? What do you espy in that person?
Oh, that's the question. Yeah, what is it? Do you know what? I don't know. I think the best description I can have of it is someone who wants to be at the edge of their comfort zone. I think that's what I said earlier, and I think that's what it is. So it's somebody who, rather than, like, if I put you in a position where you don't know what you're doing, either you hate that and you shut down and you're like, I can't do this, don't make me do this, I hate that. Or you think, well, I don't know what I'm doing, but I really want to give it a go. I'd love to have a chance to try it. If you've got that attitude, that's what I want. I don't care if you don't know how to fit a contact lens or remove a foreign body, or I don't even care if you know how to do a Volk lens or not. I can teach you skills. I can teach you techniques and put you in this environment. Like, if you've never done specialist contact lenses before, then, come and spend 6 months in our practice and you'll be an expert in specialist contact lenses, because there's so much coming through. But you need to have the attitude that's like, I want to give it a shot and be kind of at the edge of where I'm comfortable and be not sure about what I'm doing, but give it a go and be confident about giving it a go. And so when I see that in people, I think that's the attitude I'm looking for. And if I think somebody's got that, then that's the kind of person I'm looking for, and then put them in this environment and takes care of itself.
And you obviously see a really broad range of patients. Is there one particular clinical area that really excites you, or is it just the variety itself that you enjoy the most?
Yeah, I think it is the variety, actually. I remember having a chat with a guy a patient came in, he was a high-flying neurosurgeon. And I was like, oh, that must be amazing. Like, chopping someone's head open, like poking about in the brain. I was like, that must be incredible. And he was like, yeah. He says, once you've tied your 1000th aneurysm in the brain, it kind of gets quite boring. And I that was quite early on in my career. I remember him saying that, thinking, man, how can you ever get bored of prodding somebody's brain, like with their skull off, like sawing open their skull, prodding the brain? How does that ever get boring? And this was this guy saying it does get boring. And I think that led me to realise that anything will get boring if you do it often enough. Even the most rock and roll thing you can imagine, like the coolest thing ever. And when you start in optometry, like the coolest thing ever is removing a foreign body from someone's cornea, right? You're like, that's the most exciting thing I can imagine. Like, once you've done 1,000 of them, it's not that interesting. And, fitting keratoconix, wow, it sounds like it'll be fantastic and the most exciting thing ever. But I tell you what, it gets boring eventually if that's all you do. So I think I learned that lesson pretty quickly, that actually variety is the key. And so I'm always trying to find ways of making the service that we're providing here as varied and as wide as possible, just for my own interest. Like, I want to see the biggest range of stuff possible, because that's what keeps it fun. I'll get bored of doing routine refractions all the time, just like we all do. But some routine refractions are fun, and I'll get bored of doing just red eyes all the time, but some red eyes are fun. And, so that's kind of our approach. I think it is variety, and actually I don't really think it matters too much what I'm doing, as long as I'm not doing the same thing all the time.
And you mentioned the contract that you have with a hospital. Is that something that's fairly unique to your practice?
I think it is for us. For the size of it, I think it's quite unique in that most cities the size of Edinburgh are with the same number of patients would probably have an optometry unit inside their eye hospital, which would do the contact lens fitting, like Glasgow or Manchester, where I used to work. Slightly unusually, Edinburgh doesn't have that facility in its eye hospital, and so that the contact lens fitting for all the complex contact lenses is handled in community by a couple of practices. We're the majority of it because we're big. And we've been doing that for like 25, 30 years. We've run that contract. It started off very informally back in my dad's day, when the surgeons would be like, oh, can you fit this person with a lens? And it was all sort of hand in glove type stuff. But now there's a proper sort of tendered contract that we have to apply for and adhere to and all this kind of stuff. But still, it's a huge volume of patients with complex anterior segment disease of various descriptions that need contact lens fitting. And that would usually be happening inside a hospital, or to a smaller extent in more rural settings. Usually, you get sort of community contact lens schemes. But this is quite unusual that it's very condensed, but in a big city. So I think that's quite unusual. I don't know, maybe there are other big cities that have that sort of thing, but I get the feeling that's more unusual. So we have a huge volume of our work is that sort of work, and that exposes us to a huge amount of anterior segment disease. A lot of the reason I know so much, or know what I know about anterior segment disease, which I feel is quite good, is from that contract, because we see so many patients with anterior segment disease that just don't come to community optometry otherwise. So that gives us a lot of experience in IP, and that's why we wanted to pursue IP, because we just had so much anterior segment stuff happening.
Is that financially viable for the practice as well, having this sort of work? Because I think certainly within England, a lot of the challenges are taking on those more exciting clinical aspects, but getting it to pay at the same time is always a bit of a challenge.
I think the volume that we can do now is probably, it gradually started. It started small, it's got a lot bigger, and because we do quite a lot of volume, I think it is a profitable thing for us. I don't think it's as profitable as some of our aspects. There are other things we do that are more profitable, but it is so good for the practice in lots of different ways. Like, it's so good for the optometrist. They love the work, it's interesting, it brings them variety, it exposes them to stuff like a degree of learning that you just can't buy unless you were going to spend days and months and years working in a hospital clinic. So I can get them kind of hospital clinic experience, but in the practice. It gives us great links with the eye hospital. We're very close with the eye hospital and the surgeons and the docs up there and the nurses and all the rest of it. So we've got great links with the eye hospital, which is good for the practice. So I think it has a lot of ancillary benefits, which when taken as a whole, with the volume of the size of the thing, makes it profitable. And it's a great sort of referrer as well. People with complex needs refer other people with complex needs, and that generates a lot of new patients and gives us a reputation for being the place to go. If you've got problems, this is the place you come, which is not always ideal if people only seek you out when you've got issues, but they're the things we love to deal with, and we're good at dealing with them, so it doesn't faze us. And then we've sort of built the business on that model, and so it plays into that model quite nicely. So I think it can work. But I think it can easily consume your practice as well. If you're a smallish practice and all you do is that sort of work, it's not going to be enough. So you've got to keep it in proportion.
Yeah, I agree with you. The sort of patient accessibility, we're so much easier to ring up and say, "Hey, I've got a problem. Can I see Ian today, please?" It's so much easier for the patient. Thinking about optometry more generally in Scotland, since the big change to the contract that happened some years back now, how do you think that's worked out?
I think fantastically well. Yeah, fantastically well. So it's 2006 the new sort of regulations started, and they've incrementally changed since then, but it has put Scotland on a trajectory that is extremely positive in almost every way. So the general level of optometry is higher in Scotland. So you can kind of go almost anywhere in Scotland and get a pretty good eye exam, because everybody's got to be dilating you if you're over 60, everybody's got to be capable of doing contact tonometry, everybody's got to be able to do Volk, everybody's got to have a fundus camera. Those kind of basic level pillars of good optometry are required in every single practice in Scotland, no matter who you see. That means I can quite confidently say to anybody, you could walk into any Scottish optometry practice and probably get a pretty reasonably good eye exam. Obviously, come to my practice, it's going to be better, but any practice is going to give you a reasonable standard of eye care, and that's what we want. We want it to be at the base level to be a good level, and I think we've achieved that. So that's a huge positive because of the contract. And then I suppose the other thing is the kind of professional development. It has led to, I think, 25, maybe 30% of optoms in Scotland are IP? Is it that sort of number? I can't quite remember the numbers, but it's something like that. It was 10% a few years ago. I think it's something like 30% now. So, that's absolutely brilliant. 30% of optometrists are IP. Obviously, it should be 100%, and we need to work towards that, and it should be part of the degree. I think it's ridiculous. You have to wait a couple of years, forget everything you learned at uni, and then do it again. I think it's a total nonsense. But nonetheless, we're moving in the right direction there. We've got funding for education through NEST, the NHS body, the integration with optometry and medicine and the NHS is far, far better up here. We're like a genuine part of the NHS up here, which is great because it gives us access to stuff, access to computer systems, referral systems, care pathways, shared care. All that is possible because they don't just ignore us. We used to just be this kind of like weird allied health professionals that no one really thought about. But now we're a real part of eye care in Scotland. Optometry is a real cornerstone. So we're talked about in the same breath as dentists, doctors, physios, pharmacists, as we should be as kind of proper primary care clinicians, so GPs, whatever. So all that is because of the contract ultimately. And these are all huge positives. So great for patients and great for your clinical practice here in Scotland too.
That sounds all really positive. Are there any negatives to the differences in the GOS contracts?
Oh, good question. Good question. Are there negatives? I suppose one is that it's more difficult to differentiate yourself as an excellent provider of eye care if the basic standard of eye care is pretty good. Like if you look at the basic level of eye care in England, the most basic level of eye exam that you can get away with in England, it's not great. Direct ophthalmoscopy, not really dilating people, not really having to use a slit lamp. I mean, that's not really very good. But that's good if you have a higher level of practice, because you can say, well, look at this eye exam over here, it's terrible. Look what I'm offering, it's fantastic. Actually, the gap between what I'm offering, or I used to offer, and the kind of basic level that you can get everywhere else is much closer now. So I have to work twice as hard to differentiate myself as a kind of leading practitioner or whatever, or differentiate my business as a better level of eye care. That's hard work to do, and it's harder work to do that in Scotland, I guess, so that's tricky. I think probably then the other thing would be, try as we might to, we all want to develop clinical services, make the most of clinical services, right? But even in a practice like mine, which is very clinical focused and we charge high fees and all those kind of things, we still need to sell glasses to make ends meet. We're not charging enough for an eye exam. I mean, realistically, we should be charging what lawyers charge for eye exams, 200, 300, 400 quid an hour is what we should be charging for our time if you're not selling any products. And that's why when you go to a lawyer, they'll charge you 400 or 500 quid for an hour of their time, because they can't sell you a product as well, they just sell you their time. So that's the sort of money that we should be doing for eye exams, but no one's charging £500 for eye exams, or if they are, I need to hear from them and work out how they're doing it. But that's just not possible. So even with the clinical services and the level of payment, which is much better up here, we still need to do retail, and we still need to do that well, and we still need to make money from selling glasses and contact lenses and products. So that can be more difficult in this environment because more of your time is taken up doing clinical stuff. Because you've got, you're doing kind of acute stuff for GPs, maybe you're involved in shared care stuff, maybe we're doing this contact lens stuff for the hospital, maybe we're doing some other stuff that we find interesting, and it is exciting, but from a business point of view, you got to keep that in balance as well, because it can just chew you up and you could spend all your time doing acute work and that not really paying the bills.
Thinking about the retail side of it and products, and I'm about to define my age in the way I ask this question.
Yes, we provide varifocals. Don't worry about it, Ian. I can sort you out. No problem.
The frames you wear are always quite trendy. Does someone style you, or do you have a real interest in that fashion side? And what you stock in the practice, are you actively involved in deciding the look and feel of those frame ranges and the decor? Your practice looks really swanky when I've looked at your website.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the way we differentiate our practice, is we differentiate on the kind of the way it looks on the inside, and then the frames we provide, and then the services that we provide. So everything, we're trying to differentiate ourselves from other people, not just in our services, but in our style and stuff like that. In terms of frames, yeah, I mean, I take an active interest in that. We do have a head of buying who sort of is really in charge of that, but that is very much under my direction, in the sense that I meet with her every week and we're talking about what ranges we're stocking and what's going to work well in the practice and what's not going to work well. And we made a big pivot towards that kind of stuff. That was 2016. We made a big pivot towards niche brands, luxury brands, not designer brands. So nothing we have in the practice has any branding on the side of it at all. Nothing is any kind of name that you would see on the high street anywhere. There's no like Ray-Ban, stuff like that, or Tom Ford, Diesel, these things. We don't really have any of that stuff. So we try, again, just differentiate. Not that stuff's bad or whatever, it's just that's a way we differentiate ourselves. Like, if you don't want that sort of stuff, then we're the kind of place that has the stuff that you might like. So what was the question? Is that answering the question?
I think that's answered the question.
You want some trendy glasses? Is that what you want, Ian? I'll send you some trendy glasses.
Super. And then just when I was looking on your website earlier, I noticed just having a browse around, and your opening hours are Monday to Friday, and that's obviously a deliberate decision to to close on a Saturday? Is that just to give both yourself and the staff just better work-life balance? That's the way it's always been?
Yeah, a bit of both. But, patients occasionally ask me, like, oh, why are you not open on a Saturday? And I'm like, the same reason you don't want to work on a Saturday. You don't want to work. Who wants to work on a Saturday? Nobody. I mean, obviously, most people have to, and fine. But if you have the option not to, then don't. I think we keep toying around with it, and I'm like, no, we probably should, because, it makes a lot of sense. Financially, it makes a lot of sense. But I think, well, I haven't really optimized 5 days a week. And until I feel like I've actually done everything I can do in 5, I don't need to worry about 6. And I've still not done everything I can do in 5. There's a lot more I could do to optimize our offering at the moment, make it more efficient, make it better. And then once I feel like I've done that, then I guess I will have to open on a Saturday. But I keep talking about it, but I don't want to do it. I want to go to my kids' football. I want to relax. Other staff love it. It's a great recruiting tool. A lot of people come from other places because they're like, I hate working weekends. I want to work in a different environment, and this is it's a big draw for people. So, because we're quite big now, we do have to recruit quite often, because the bigger you get, the more you have to recruit, and so we do need to be attractive to people. And that's one of the ways, as well as paying well and being like a nice employer, which I feel like we are. But another way is that there's no weekends, and that's like quite a big deal for optometry and front of house staff. So yeah, that's basically I don't want to work Saturdays, so that's why it never happens.
Can we go on to your recent business changes? You were a pretty high-profile addition to the Hakim Group in the last few months. Can you tell us a bit about what nudged your decision that way?
Yeah, I think there's a range of benefits to my practice personally, and then I think there's a range of benefits to practices generally of joining that sort of group. So we talked a wee bit about that idea of consolidation, and I think one of the benefits of the Hakim Group is the ability to consolidate and yet retain your independent identity, and that's been important to me. Obviously, it does change. It's not the same as when I was outside of the group, but it does let me retain the values and ethos of the practice and doing things the way I like to do things, but get the benefits of being part of a big group in terms of supplier pricing, cost efficiencies, back office efficiencies, and they're really important to a practice of my size because we're big and our costs are big now, and any savings we can make there are really huge, and we need to look for savings. It's a competitive industry in a competitive time, so we need to find ways of saving money and working more efficiently, and I think we had got to the stage where I felt I had done everything I could do. Like, my costs were as low as I could get them, and I couldn't get them any lower, but they were still too high. So, where do you go there? And being part of a group is a chance there. And then I think there's an advantage for us in terms of what we can bring to a group like that. So, we do things quite differently here. We've got a lot of learning, got a lot of experience doing different types of services and doing things in a different way. And I think we can potentially have a big influence in a group like that, demonstrating other models of optometry. It doesn't always have to be just flogging glasses, and it doesn't have to be boring, and it can be a career that is varied and interesting. It can be a business that is profitable but doesn't have to open on Saturdays. There's other ways of doing things, and I guess we want to showcase that here's another way you could do optometry, and I think the group gives us the chance to show that and take that learning into other practices and say, look at how these guys do it. Let's try and do that. And I think that would be good for optometry in general. So I want our practice to have a positive influence on the optometry landscape, and I think I can do that better as part of a group than I can on my own. My influence is now much larger, I think, part of the group than it was before. And I think that's important as I get to the sort of midpoint in my career. So that's some of the reasons I thought it was a good move for us, and it's been good so far. Been really good so far.
Ian, just moving away from the practice just for a moment, if you've been involved in expert witness work, I believe, in the past, and it's something that I know very little about. What's it like?
I absolutely love that. Yeah, I absolutely love that. I kind of entered it a bit by accident, really. I think my dad used to do it very occasionally. So now and again, lawyers would write and say, oh, look, we need an expert witness. And I thought, that sounded quite fun. This is back in the halcyon days, 2000 to 2005, 2005 to 2010. Had nothing better to do with my time. Young guy, no commitments, brilliant. So I was working all the hours that I could get on whatever I wanted. And so this thing came along. I was like, that sounds like quite good fun. Maybe I'll have a punt at that. So I kind of did it and just found it a really engaging process. And since then, have really enjoyed it. And it's been fantastic for my clinical development. I think it's one of the best things I do in terms of my personal clinical development is doing this expert witness work. So it's really, really interesting. It's hard, but again, it's variety. It's something different. I don't do loads of it. It's not what I do all the time, and I think that would get stale, but I do it now and again, and it's really interesting and it's really hard. So I find it really taxing, which I think is also good for me. Living inside my comfort zone all the time is not great. So I need to make sure that I'm stretching myself, and that's one of the ways I stretch myself. So I find it a lot of fun. Fun, maybe not quite the right word. I find it engaging, and I think it's important, and I think it's important that it's done well, and I think I can do it well. So that all sort of comes together. Like, I do feel the burden when someone is at the sharp end of a clinical negligence claim. I can imagine what that's like. I know what it's like to miss stuff. I know what it's like to be in that position, and I know what it's like to be in practice and be rushed and not have time and be tired and be feeling under the weather and just not do a great job, and yet then still having the responsibility to look after a patient properly and worrying about making mistakes. I know what all that feels like, and so I like to provide a kind of sensible, balanced judgment on that, because I know what it's like to be an optometrist, and I think I can do a fair job of saying, well, that really should have been spotted, or no, I think that's okay. Okay, it wasn't brilliant practice, but like I can imagine that happening, and I think getting that balance is quite important, and I feel like I'm quite good at that now because I've done quite a lot of it. So I quite like taking on that responsibility, because I think I can do a fair job here and I can give this optometrist a fair hearing. And if they've made a mistake, I'm going to call them out, but if they haven't made a mistake, I'm going to go to the hilt for them. And I quite like that. I find that engaging and important.
What does it actually involve? I mean, I'm watching too many lawyer dramas at the moment. Are you on the stand being cross-examined, or are you sat with a bundle of paperwork late at night?
Yeah, it's the latter 99.9% of the time. So basically, the usual pattern is you get sent a bunch of records and an outline of a case. So the lawyer says, look, this person ended up having a retinal detachment and they were seen by the optometrist 3 days before. The optometrist said that everything was fine and said they had cataract and sent them away. It turned out then they had a retinal detachment and now they've gone blind. So the question is, should the optometrist have spotted that this person had a retinal detachment or not? And you get the case records and you have to look through and try and work out what happened, and then work out, well, that's what happened, and then did the optometrist act appropriately or not? Did they act in a way that was reasonable given the situation? Or, so in that kind of scenario, did the patient come in complaining of flashing lights and floaters, and the optometrist just didn't dilate them and didn't bother having a look? Then, that's more difficult to defend, isn't it? But if the optometrist dilated them, had a good look, said there was no tobacco dust, looked with a Vogue lens, and didn't find a retinal detachment, then is that good enough? And the answer in that case would be yes, it is good enough. So, that's the sort of thing, and you've got to make the judgment on whether the optometrist has done enough to be what's defined as reasonably competent. Have they acted with reasonable competence in this situation? They don't have to be the best optometrist in the world. They don't have to be gold standard. They don't have to be amazing. They don't have to do everything right, but they do have to act reasonably competent, and finding that balance point is what's really interesting and difficult and challenging, but that's what makes the work enjoyable. So you do that 99.9% of the time. 0.001% of the time these cases get all the way to court. More often than not, they're settled one way or the other, so either the claimant gives up or the defence pay up, if you like, or settle, I think is the correct term, sorry. But occasionally they end up in court, and you would have to give your evidence. So I've written a report, and then I would get questioned about my report, and the lawyer would say, so you've written this, what about this? And you would have to answer questions on that in court. Not as exciting as it looks in the dramas at all. But good fun, and really good for my clinical practice, because it makes me think about my own practice. Whenever I read this, I'm like, I must make sure I I do that thing there that this person forgot to do, because I make that mistake all the time myself. And so it's been really good for my practice in terms of personally, and then in terms of the systems and processes that we have in place. A lot of the systems and processes have come from that work, and learning from, frankly, others' mistakes or others' missteps. So which is, slightly unfortunate that that's the way you learn, but that is the way you learn. So I learn from my own mistakes, but I also learn from observing other people's. So.
I'm convinced we could just chat forever, but I'm conscious that we do need to wrap things up. But just maybe a closing thought. What do you think optometry will look like, say, in a decade's time? What do you think we'll be doing as optometrists?
Oh, I hesitate to make predictions, because all the predictions I've made previously have been wrong. So I don't know. Yeah, it's difficult to predict, isn't it? Because things happen that you can't predict, like COVID or whatever, and that completely changes the dynamic in a way that I certainly didn't foresee. So I think there may come a divergence between people doing more clinical work and people doing more retail work. It feels that it's difficult to hold those two in tension very successfully, and it may be that you move toward a more sort of purely clinical role, but the fee structure for that isn't there at the moment, so I don't know how that would work really. It's very difficult to make that financially viable as it stands, unless you work inside a hospital. That's the sort of closest equivalent. It's hard to see what that looks like in community, but there are models out there. So my wife is what's called a clinical pharmacist, where the clinical team, the pharmacy team, pay for her to work inside a GP, doing clinical pharmacy work inside a GP's practice. So you could imagine potentially some primary care body, employing an optometrist to work in a GP, doing purely clinical work, using that sort of clinical pharmacy model. I can see that. I can imagine that. There's a lot of road bumps, but I could imagine that happening. So maybe you'll see optometrists working in clinical settings like GP or multidisciplinary practices, where, and in fact, there are already some people doing that sort of thing, maybe on a more sessional basis, but maybe that's an increasing model. So sort of, if you like, the clinical pharmacy model. What else? I suppose there's just going to be the inevitable continual creep of optometry upwards. We need to keep taking new skills and keep taking new ground. So I did some training in minor surgery. I did some training in laser procedures like YAG and SLT. And yeah, optometrists are doing these in hospital, which is fine, but you want to be doing these in practice. Like, I want to be doing SLT on my patients in practice, not because some consultants told me to do it, but because I think that's what this patient needs. And I want to make the decision, and I want to treat the patient. Just like we did with IP, instead of saying, you've got a red eye, you need to go to the GP to get that treated, we said, no, we can do this. Like, I can make the decision and I can treat it. And that should be like that with glaucoma, should be like that with YAG, should be like that with probably a range of other things, and maybe some retinal work, simple retinopexy stuff could easily be done in community. I don't see why not. I'd like to think that in my professional lifetime, there's optometrists doing simple cataract surgery. I don't think that's beyond us in terms of the technical ability of us to use our hands. It's no harder than, I'm saying this from ignorance, I don't know, but I have done a basic surgical training with doctors, and I got on okay, and I'm not surgically trained. So, there's microsurgical courses that I know some optometrists have been on and done and do absolutely fine. So, you can learn these techniques, and I don't see why that should be impossible to imagine given the way cataract lists are at the moment. So, stuff like that, I don't know. I'd like to think that. I think back to when my dad, you're talking like when you qualified, Ian, but when my dad qualified, he couldn't even tell a patient that they had a cataract. They weren't even allowed to use the word. Couldn't even make the diagnosis. And when he retired, he did his IP right before he retired, good effort, and like the day before he retired basically was writing a prescription to deal with anterior uveitis for steroids. And like, he was remarking on that, thinking that is an unbelievable change. Like, if you'd gone back to when he was qualifying to say that's what you'll be doing when you retire, folk would have laughed him out of court. So just as probably folk listening to this are laughing at me saying we might be doing cataract surgery, I don't think it's any more outrageous than it was to say that we'd be writing scripts for steroids 30, 40 years ago. So, 20 years from now, I wouldn't be surprised to see it. I'd hope that. I quite fancy the chance to do it myself. So I'm going to be pushing for that if there's an opportunity. But we'll see.
Ian, I think that's a brilliant place to end. It's been really fascinating and inspiring chatting to you. So thank you so much for your time.
Grand. Oh, thanks for having me. It's always nice to chat, and hopefully it's been useful. I mean, I don't want to just talk about myself all the time, but hopefully it does inspire people and encourages people to keep moving forward in the career. That's what we want. That's what we need. We need everybody to be doing that in optometry to drive the profession forward. So go for it.